right, good evening and thank you for joining us. This is Live with Faye. Every night we have discussions on the most important things in this country. Today we're discussing the union budget. There are two discussions. Right now we're going to talk about the impact the announcements will have on your personal money, your investments, your taxation, your real estate, your housing. And at 9 o'clock we'll be looking at the economy specifically with a group of economists. But I must tell you something about the panel we have today. So these gentlemen are the top minds in the country in their specific field. And they've actually been having a conversation with me every budget evening for the last 13 years, except for the 1 year in between when I didn't have a platform to have this conversation. So I'm so thrilled that we're continuing this tradition now on the internet that we used to do on television. And I want to introduce all of them to you. Mr. Dhirendra Kumar is the CEO of Value Research. For those of you who don't know, and I'm sure there are very few of you who don't know, Value Research Online is the foremost research and knowledge base. If you're interested in mutual funds and then personal finance, you should go check it out if you don't already know. Mr. Anuj Puri is the chairman of Anarock Group. Again, the foremost mind about real estate in India. He headed some of the biggest real estate organizations, and then he went out and started his own organization and is doing remarkably well. It's been a pleasure to know him for all of these years. And of course, Mr. Shailesh Haribhakti, the chairperson of Shailesh Haribhakti and Associates, is India's most amazing mind on taxation and many, many other things. Now, he's fundamentally, by training, a chartered accountant and a cost accountant, an auditor, financial planner, and a fraud examiner. But he's also on the boards of many, many important companies in this country. And he's written many books, and he also consults with government on matters of taxation. So I couldn't have possibly hoped for a better group and a more generous group, because they've always been very generous with their time. But here's the odd thing, right? We put this together a couple of days ago because we thought, given the budget, there's going to be something amazing to talk about. But Dhirendra Kumar has been sort of predicting this for the last 15 years, that the budget is a non-event when it comes to your personal finances. This year, it really is a non-event, because there hasn't actually been much that has happened to do with our personal money. So I can actually give you a spoiler that all three are going to say that you shouldn't be making any major changes to your finances based on anything that was announced today, because really there was nothing announced today to do with our finances. So what we're going to do is, because I've already got that time, we're going to answer questions about your money, even if it doesn't have anything to do with the budget. And if you have questions about the budget, well, feel free as well. Here's the thing I'm not going to do. I am not going to ask them to rate the budget on a scale of 1 to 10, because everybody has already asked that question. And I know their answers already, because they've been giving me these answers for 13 years, and those answers rarely change. I could tell you what Anuj is going to say right now. He'd say 7, it was a good balancing act, they managed this and that. So we're not going to go down that road. We're actually going to talk about, how we can improve where we are right now personally. Now, the government obviously had its balancing act to do, but we have our balancing acts to do as well. Tough year, pay cuts, job loss, things are getting more expensive. We have to find a way to balance all of this out with what's happening in the stock market, what's happening with our real estate, what's happening with our taxes and that sort of thing. That's what we're going to focus on. So if I may get to it, without asking you, Mr. Haribhakti, to rate this on a scale of 1 to 10, other than the fact that there was definitely an attempt there to simplify taxation, it really wasn't much changed there. Nothing massive in terms of direct tax, nothing massive in terms of new taxes as well, right?
No, but there have been 2 or 3 very significant directional changes, Faye, which are going to play out as we go forward. One is this whole movement towards tax determination. Now, so anybody above 75 and having unearned income, so to speak, will simply not have to file a return. And their deductions will happen directly by the paying bankers through a monthly removal from their bank accounts. We already reached that as the most modern level of tax gathering. The second stage is that for other people who have very steady, stable, known kind of sources of income, they have very little to fill up. So 90% of the return filing will be done for you. Now, that is a very big change. It can ultimately result in a fully tax determined situation for all of us because of the financial footprint and because of all our digital payments and the fact that everything that we are doing financially is visible, transparent, there's a trail. And in any case, there is a cross verification because of the tax information network. And so we will see a time very soon when India will move to tax determination. So that's the one big change. The second change is faceless
Yes.
IT-80. Now, that is a huge, big move. So what is happening is that the efficiency and the non-interface between the SSE and the tax gatherer is now moving up the scale. Now, that is very good in terms of transparency and ability to be accurate and timeliness with which the decisions will be given. To my mind, that improves the tax framework dramatically. And for this, they need to be congratulated. So without making any changes in the tax rates, because of compliance and buoyancy, the expectation is that the tax gathering will be much higher. And in the indirect taxes, they are just cleaning up the acts. They're removing 400 or 300 nonsensical exemptions which have continued to remain in the customs. They are removing inversion both in GST and in customs. They are in customs, they've increased the levies to be in line with what consumers in India need, and they have increased the protection where we have a clear ability to be competitive in manufacturing. So I think all in all, these are the fine changes that have happened in the tax framework, which I find directionally very positive.
So just to read out to our audience, the things that my team and I found and we put together. So obviously the big takeaway is there's no change in your tax slabs or your tax rates. There's no extra tax, as was expected by a lot of people, that there will be a COVID cess to pay for the extra cost of vaccines and things like that. There hasn't been any of that. Senior citizens above the age of 75 don't need to file their tax returns anymore. This doesn't mean they don't pay taxes. They don't have to file the returns because the bank will deduct, especially if you have only a pension or only interest income coming from your fixed deposits. The banks will take care of that for you. Review assessments now limited to 3 years. So up till now, if you filed your assessment and there was a problem with it, up to 6 years ago, the IT department could still pull you up for it. Now that was announced limited to only 3 years. Faceless dispute resolution, which simplifies the process and removes the human element. And there's been a lot of complaint about sort of tax terrorism and harassment from tax officials. This should reduce that. Tax on dividend income only after the payment of dividend income, which should make things easier for those people who invest, for example, in the stock market. And the affordable housing tax break is now extended for 1 more year. And I'll come back to a couple of these points, Mr. Haribhakti, but specifically to do with the faceless appeal scheme that you were talking about. Forgive me, there is a case in the Delhi High Court where the petitioner is saying that the faceless system means that you may or may not be given the right of a personal hearing in the matter, and that might not be fair. And that matter is sub judice. And the argument here is, if there is an appeal, shouldn't there be an opportunity for everyone to make have a personal hearing on that matter? I just wanted to understand where you stand on that.
I don't think I want us to go back and I don't want to take 1 step forward and 2 steps back. I think once we go to faceless, it has to stay faceless. And we need to trust the quality of our representation, the quality of data, the quality of the tax information network, and the intent of the tax gatherers. And that trust needs to be built up. And these are all trust building mechanisms. we should now not ask. It's completely regressive to go back and ask for personal hearings. It will simply not work. So I'm
Okay.
completely against going back on this
Okay.
forward march.
To our audience, I can see your questions. We'll take them as soon as everyone has had a chance to make their opening statements. Mr. Dhirendra Kumar, thank you for joining us. Such a pleasure to speak with you, as always. You've obviously always said that the budget should make no difference to our personal finance decisions. The budget is effectively an announcement of accounts of the government of India, which is precisely what they have done today. It was a very short speech and none of the big bang things that people would normally expect from this. But is there room for disappointment that there wasn't anything left on the table there for the average citizen?
Yes, I've always said that individuals need not worry, because if you have planned a little bit in terms of allocating your money, then for a budget or any such event, you don't need to really change your strategy or make any tactical change. But this is one budget which I was waiting, because it required imagination. The government also had the excuse to tax us. That is why everybody was expecting it. It was a nice excuse that we are facing a very unusual situation, and if everybody is taxed, then it's all right. So in that sense, that is what was reflected in the market. 4 5 days we saw market going down, and today the market has recovered all the losses of the past couple of days. So in that sense, it is just about that. But I would say that this budget, the way it has brought everything in terms of raising, one listing all the imaginative things for raising resources without any additional tax, and execute, and it will be very dependent on doing all those things very finely, because it requires a lot of things to be done very efficiently in a time bound manner, because you can't really wait forever for these things to happen. So in that sense, I was really waiting for it. And simplification. Of course, the government had used this opportunity to spend and spend and spend, but simplification, and then coming up with this roadmap, coming with this imaginative strategy. If they succeed, I think they would have turned this crisis into an opportunity.
Very well said. Anuj, Puri, good evening. Thank you for joining us. Specifically, there were some infrastructure announcements which are expected every year from the government. Railways, infrastructure, these were the announcements, airports. But really the only thing in terms of housing was the tax break on affordable housing that now extends for another year. And this is on, houses where the tax benefit is 2 lakh rupees. These are on small affordable housing that falls into a specific category. So it doesn't really change too much. And I know that the real estate industry has been through a terrible year, following many terrible years, and was really hoping for some sort of fillip from the government, some help from the government to get people to consider buying homes again. Is there anything we missed here, or did the real estate industry get a wide pass and not too much attention?
I would say is a couple of things, Faye. One, directionally, it was a very positive budget. And what was really positive was the lifting up of the sentiment. As Dhirendra rightly said, is many of us were expecting that there was going to be an additional tax. I mean, it's there in your presentation as well. The first point, cess because of the COVID tax. So clearly the sentiment that has come out has been very positive, and real estate is a lot led by the sentiment. I would say is second, Faye, real estate on the residential side had started to do well since September, October of this year. So fortunately, for whatever reason, whether it's social security or low tax interest rates, and the way the developers brought down their prices, we've seen a huge amount of registrations, huge amount of sale that has happened. And also many of the state governments, Faye, have been very positive, including the Maharashtra state government, by bringing in the stamp duty. I think the government has remained very true to its point that they are only going to focus on affordable housing, and they are only going to be focused on the rental housing for the migrant worker. And these have been throughout since 2014 on affordable housing, and since 2018 they have added this rental housing for migrant workers. So I wouldn't have expected anything else from the government. There is always a lot of ask for the real estate, but fortunately, real estate for the right players has started to do well. And I was just hoping that there was nothing that makes the government disrupt what is going on well. And true to that cause, they have not done anything which will disrupt this ongoing rally that we are seeing on the resi part. But what they have done very well is that they have continued with their tax holiday and the tax exemption to ensure that both the supply and the demand on the affordable housing continues to remain benefited. And we're going to see the fine print on the rental housing for the migrant workers, what that says. But my guess is there is going to be more tax holidays that are going to be given to the developers who are building those rental housing.
Mm-hmm. But Mr. Puri, when we talk about residential people buying homes, really sentiment is one thing, and I understand how you might be able to connect those two things. But the truth is also that we've lost a lot of jobs in the last 1 year, especially salary jobs, and it's the confidence that comes from salary jobs that leads people to make decisions about buying homes. Nobody wants to buy a house when you feel that your job might be a little shaky. And to be honest, there are very few people in this country who don't feel that right now. There might be very few people in the world who don't feel that right now. So is that, should that have been a consideration at some point, shoring up jobs or, shoring up investments to a point where jobs become more secure? It wasn't
I thought, Faye, that it was quite stressed upon by the Honorable Finance Minister. If you look at it, from the scope that she brought in on healthcare, on investment, on spending of the capex, I felt the direction that she was bringing in was to attract a lot of the foreign capital that at this moment in time is available in abundant to India to not only prop up the economy, but also help in the employment. And I did feel is that it was an important part of when she mentioned about the infra spending and when she mentioned about the capex, that it was about creating jobs and it was also bringing in the money from overseas. Fortunately, there is a lot of money that has got printed in the US and Europe, and hopefully that some part of it will start to find its way into some of the infra developments in India.
Okay, fair enough. We have a lot of questions coming in. Jyotsna Kedar, Suraj and Rachna Chatwani have both given us 1,000 rupees each. Thank you. This is how we pay salaries. So we appreciate, all of the support that we get from our audience. A question that's coming in quite a lot is about petrol and diesel. There's an extra tax that's come in the budget of 2.5 rupees on petrol and 4 rupees on diesel. Now, this is an agriculture cess, but it does say that it's being adjusted against excise duty. So the end result for the consumer is still the same. Mr. Haribhakti, there's still a fair amount of confusion about this because we are not really clear about the breakup of excise as well. So does this mean that what used to go into excise duty is now going to go into an agricultural cess? And why would the government need to do this?
No, so this is the difference between what goes to the state government and what goes to the central government. The cess will now go to the central government and they will be spending for the agricultural infrastructure development. And again, this is an experimental thing where they are saying that while we'll give you a set off against the excise that you might have paid in the state that you were being assessed in, we will now pick up the cess and spend for adding to the agricultural infrastructure, which means they will set up this APMC in a better way. They will make sure that there is better ability for the farmers and others to get prices and quotes and really access the markets in a fuller way. So it goes a long way in terms of supporting the proposed reforms, which we don't know when they will actually get implemented. But it does, even if those reforms don't come up, it will strengthen the existing infrastructure of the market mechanism. And therefore, I think in many ways it is a welcome thing. It will not affect the consumer, but it will transfer the money for the specific purpose for which it is levied.
Right. So for our audience, basically, excise duty that comes in is a tax that is collected by the central government, but a portion of it needs to be distributed to state governments as per the law. VAT is collected by the state government and used by the state government. So by moving some amount of money, which was also done last year, by the way, last year's budget and the year before that, a certain amount of money as tax on petrol, and it's about 30 rupees roundabout is the excise that we pay on petrol. 30 rupees is what we pay on VAT, and 30 rupees is the actual petrol. So altogether, about 90 rupees is what we're paying close about. They've just basically moved it into an account where they don't have to give it to the state government. So you will not have any difference in your account. Dhirendra Kumar, a question that's coming in, and a fair question. This one is Manoj Lewis, who says senior citizens above the age of 75 will not have to file their returns. How many people really in that group are paying taxes? The truth is that actually the tax base is small. And those above the age of 75 is a really, really small base. And since it's not a tax break, but it's actually a simplification, would it have been better served to give it to all senior citizens, for example, who are on pension and interest?
Ideally, yes. But, I would look at this, people beyond 75 as an experimental thing. It is actually fine-tuning the model. If they succeed with the small base, because if it is being done on a large scale for everybody beyond 60, which is the official definition of senior citizens, then it will be, implementing it on a large scale for such a mechanism might be cumbersome, or it will lead to all kind of unexpected teething issues, which will be very frustrating for these people. So I think it's a good start, and on a small base, and then maybe it can be extended over time.
Anuj, Puri, when we talk about the infrastructure and you are talking about a rally, and you and I can have a separate argument about whether what we are seeing in the residential market should be qualified as a rally or not, or is it perhaps just sign of movement after several years? What is your advice to somebody looking to either buy or sell a home at this point?
So, Faye, just on the first point, and we can continue to have a discussion on that. This time the government of India data is showing the sales that have happened, and we've seen that in Maharashtra. It is the highest ever in last 4 years that we've seen October, November, December sales, and you'll see some of the listed companies, their sales number, and many of them will perhaps show higher sales in March 2021 in comparison to March 2020. Having said that, Faye, the overall market would shrink on the sales, and it will need to shrink. Exactly the point that you had earlier mentioned is that many people have lost the jobs, and for the first half of the year we were largely in the lockdown period. So whatever activity has picked up since October. Now, whether this is going to be a pent-up demand, to answer the question, or whether it is going to be sustained, we will see it over the next few quarters. It does look that for good quality developers, for ready-to-move in inventory, for inventory which is largely in the sub 1 crore, it seems that there are actual home buyers buying for social security reason. And we're seeing many younger people, many millennials buying who used to rent it earlier. And, for reasons when we meet up with them, whether it's their parents or their spouses or the partners, saying to them is that for social security, we want you to buy. So if the viewer has asked it for their own consumption as an end user, I would certainly say is please go ahead and buy. Be careful with whom you are buying. Try and see if you can buy a completed unit, or at least if it's 6 to 9 months away from completion. Second phase, very clear, is that there will be a lot of discounts that will be thrown by the developers, not necessarily get swayed by those discounts, because there will be many projects that will not get completed in this. Third, if they are an investor, then I would suggest not to get into the market. This is not an investor market. This is an end user market. And
does that mean you expect the prices to come down further?
I expect the prices to stay here for a longish period of time. So as an investor, you're not going to see necessarily growth in the prices. And why I say as an end user, try and buy it, because the good inventory in many of these buildings, which has got better views, will get sold, and hence you'll only get inferior inventory. that may be left over. And if you are a seller of your property, I would say is stay for a little while, let the prices go up, let the prices firm a little bit before you bring out your home to sell.
But I'm tempted to set a cat among the pigeons right now and ask the same question to Dhirendra Kumar. Dhirendra, do you recommend renting and investing that money in this stock market that's moving very interestingly at this point, rather than buying for social security, buying a home or a flat for social security at this point?
No, I think, I'm quite pleased that, Anuj is saying what I've been saying all these years, that real estate is an investment. But take a home, it gives you much more than, it's just much more than an investment. And maybe, one should actually go for a home if you can live in it, simply because you will be saving rent. And for most people, that turns out to be the only asset built up in their lifetime, and you do it with a small contribution. I come across so many people who have no other investment. They have not accumulated anything, but they only have their home. And that can actually come in handy when they get older, they can, at least there's the asset that they have. So go for a home, live in it, make sure that you're not, uh, living a life which is very difficult for the sake of just having the home, which I come across. Make sure that not more than 1/3 of your income is going towards the EMI. You have worked towards the accumulation. So I think these basic things being taken care of. You're going to live in that house. You're going to get the delivery, and the other is that you're not stretching beyond a point. Go for it.
Go for it if you really want to buy that home. Very interesting. Not more than 1/3 of your take-home income should be going towards your EMI. That way you have enough money and it's not choking you really. Mr. Shailesh, Haribhakti, here's a question for you. At this point, when we look at all of the different options available to us, in my opinion, at least, I don't see real estate as an investment, because if we saw it as an investment, it would be a very bad investment, because it hasn't, like Anuj Puri said, moved for 4 years. It's just those of us who paying EMIs on our home getting nervous about the fact that we don't want the value to drop any further than what we paid for it to begin with. Do you recommend the stock market? Do you recommend mutual funds? Do you recommend just plain old fixed deposits? Or should we just keep our money in a pillowcase at this point? What should we be doing?
No, I think now is the time to really pick up a piece of paper and write down what is truly your risk profile, your objectives, what are your short-term, long-term, what are your obligations, and really do a serious attempt at making a plan for yourself. And then I would say, go to somebody like Dhirendra Kumar or whoever is your advisor. Make sure that they give their own vetting and their own advice on it. And then please monitor it and make sure that you don't buy it and forget it. That is the worst thing you can do. But if you ask me honestly how I would divide a portfolio of incomes, first, I would want to go with what Anuj and Dhirendra said a little while ago. Use your first surplus to buy your own house, because that, I think, is supposed to be the anchor security that everybody in India looks for. So I'm totally with both of them on that, but only for living in it. After that, I would do a 40%, depending on your risk profile, range of 20 to 40% in equities, a range of 20 to 40% in mutual funds, largely equity oriented, and the rest in debt related. And now there will be many new opportunities with InvITs and REITs and all kinds of debts which are rated. The whole debt market is going to get very, very exciting in India. I'm looking forward to particularly the REITs, the InvITs, and the debt market, the rated debt.
There is a very interesting things happening in the stock market. Of course, the government made, the finance minister made two interesting announcements. One is the lifting of the cap on insurance companies. Now, insurance companies up to now could only get 49% foreign ownership. It's now gone up to 76%. So 74%, I beg your pardon. So you obviously, every bank that owns an insurance company, and almost all of them do, will have the opportunity to raise money from overseas for a slice of that insurance business. Also, the listing of LIC. So we've seen banking do really well. On the Sensex, banking went up 8.33% today. Is this a one-day thing? Do we expect this to have a slightly longer-term, impact on the market? Because while everybody rejoiced to the fact that the market did well today, like you pointed out, it's been coming down for the last several days, and today it sort of recovered because those fears went away. But what are your expectations, for those of us who have mutual funds, for those of us who might be holding some long-term stocks? Should this have any impact on that?
No, I think that, I would not like to decode or make sense of, one day's movement or, value unlocking from their insurance holding. Because, there are 3-4 very well managed private sector insurance companies. They're already public. A good part of it has been unlocked anyway. And there could be some still, some more steam left or in terms of ability to dilute. But I think, there are banks which are able to leverage their distribution for selling that insurance. And there are banks which are unable to leverage that distribution. So it all depends. But I would say that, what has happened today is actually makes me exciting about the prospects of the economy and business in general. And so diversify, invest regularly, make your equity allocation with confidence. What we have been seeing right now is that, a small part of the market, which is very expensive or looks expensive by historical yardsticks or the matrix. Uh, it may not be expensive simply because, the earnings have come down to a level from where it always looks expensive, and it might be temporary. We just might be getting out of it, out of the crisis. So that is one way of looking at it. I would say that what Mr. Haribhakti said, if you have a plan, if you have made that allocation, maybe a 40% equity, 60% equity, whatever it be, decide on that, be at it, and do periodic rebalancing. Because just leaving it and let it go won't work. Do a quarterly or an annual review. That should be about it. And if you have your home, if you have this long-term allocation, you'll be taken care of. If you don't have it, don't try to time it or try to make sense of this budget or something else that will happen, or look at dabbling somewhere in the cryptocurrency or too many exciting things. Maybe diversify. And you remember, when we used to do the our investor guide, we had one of our aggressive portfolio which had 20% allocation to an international fund, of the few ones which is available, which was available then. That has turned out to be a blockbuster. If you would have just kept it the way it was, and if it was periodically rebalanced, then it would have enhanced the return by 3-4 percentage point, which is quite substantial over the last 12 years, 13 years. So I would say the magic of compounding will work if you invest in equity, periodic rebalancing, and there is a great reward for staying the course.
Dhirendra, I'm just looking at the fixed deposit interest rates right now. They're about between 5.5% to 6.5%, depending on the bank. Senior citizens, in some cases, get a little more than that, about 0.25% more than that. For someone who does not understand how equity works, given that these are pretty decent rates, and they might go down further from where we are, does it make sense to lock some money into a fixed deposit if that's what I'm comfortable with?
No, I think, for the small guy, I think the first stop should be senior citizen savings scheme, which will be higher than this from the bank deposit. And, the post office MIP and that LIC, Pradhan Mantri Vyay Yojana, something like that. So that will actually take, something like 15 lakh for senior citizen, 10 lakh for the LIC scheme. And so first 30-40 lakh can be taken care of. And that is a guaranteed income generating investment. And always better than the bank fixed deposit. Last 1 year has been very confusing for investors and in general. Everybody has been expecting a calamity in the equity market, and the market has not only recovered, more than recovered. It is at its all-time high. Everybody expected that interest rates will come down, and it did come down, and fixed income funds, because of the inverse relation, has been extremely rewarding. The gilt funds have given 20% return, or interest rates go down, bond funds go up. Now we will see a reverse of that. And if equity doesn't come down and it actually is able to sustain, so everybody has missed the market to a reasonable extent, waiting for that correction which never happened after March. So it's a very difficult thing to time it, and I think it is just a reminder, grim reminder, that make a plan, stick to it, and for your guaranteed income, for the income on which you have to rely, there should be a fixed income allocation, and these should be the first stop.
But personally, I've always been a big believer in the SIP. I don't stop my SIPs or touch them irrespective of whatever happens. And I don't think there's been anything scarier than COVID that has happened in our lifetimes to the
You have been
economy.
lucky because, you have been lucky because, you have your earnings. Because I've come across people who are, who are facing the prospect of losing their job, or they have, their income has come down even if they haven't lost their job. So in that case, you have to really reprioritize and working on that income stream which can support or, contribute towards that. But yes, one should try and do that as much as possible.
That is true. I mean, while my situation was not COVID linked, I did become independent over the last 1 year and did not take a salary, for about 8 of those months. And I just basically shuffled money around to continue to feed my mutual funds. But you're right about the fact that not everybody would have that luxury. And I'll come back to that point in a bit about what we should be doing and how we should continue to feed our investments if we're facing that challenge. But Mr. Haribhakti, quick question to you. A couple of years ago, the government cut corporate tax in order to increase investment and have our companies do better, which was a great thing. It was cheered by many. We've also learned that in the last 1 year, Indian billionaires have become richer by 35% during the lockdown, which is higher than billionaires anywhere else in the world. Billionaires all over the world became richer, but especially in India, it was a sharper uptick. Do you think, given where we are right now, a tax on the very, very wealthy might in fact be necessary?
I don't think so. You see, the logic that the government has deployed this time is that a 9.5% deficit will correct itself if we have access to debt funds at reasonable cost over long periods of time, number one. They have also taken into consideration that it will be a slope that will go down because, and they've already done that, from 9.5, the next year's estimate is 6.8, going down to 4.5 in 3 years' time, and then going back to the 3% norm that was originally set. So I don't think that taxing the super rich is going to be the right approach. The right approach is what is embedded in our budget this time, which is go towards the ESG framework. If you ask me in one sentence what this budget is, it is an ESG budget. It has taken into account all the sustainable development goals of the United Nations. It has focused not only on the job earner, it has focused on the gig worker, the contracted employee. They've focused on everybody who's an entrepreneur. The one-person company idea, which I think has been missed by most people, is a very important idea because it brings into the fold of limited liability individuals and non-residents and people from anywhere in the world who want to innovate. So I think this is the broadening of the definition, which is in SDG 8, of decent work. And that is the focus that we need to keep on. And because of that, I would not argue in favor of taxing the super rich. It is far superior to get them to do the heavy lifting on environment, do the heavy lifting on social responsibility out of the market's desire that if they don't do that, their stocks will not be rewarded. That is a far superior way to do it.
Okay. Now, my two questions. First to Anuj Puri and then to Dhirendra Kumar. Anuj Puri, what do we do if we have a running EMI on a home that we have bought and we've either lost jobs or taken pay cuts, and paying that EMI has now become a challenge? What is your advice to people, the many people facing this challenge right now?
So Faye, if they have lost a job and they don't have an ability to pay the EMI, clearly it is going to be a tough situation where they will have to then sell that product. Now, if it is a completed house, if it's a completed unit, it's much more easier to sell than if it is under construction. And if it is under construction of a good developer, it's that much more easier. But if it is of not a good repute, the developer who's making it, then it is going to be a tough one to go out and sell. So clearly not a good position if they have been paying EMIs and it is under construction of a developer who's not of well repute and does not have the right credibility. It'll be tough for them to be able to find a buyer for that. But my suggestion is, Faye, if they can go through this period, given that it is low interest rates and hopefully the EMIs would have come down, hopefully they can go back to the bank and stretch on the period of the EMIs, get in some waivers. They should be able to retain it, because I do feel is that it is with great difficulty a person is able to build their own sort of home. It's a very large investment, as Dhirendra said, is it's nearly 1/3 of your income that goes in for a fairly large period of time. And if there is a way that they can retain it, they should try. But if not, then it's going to be an unfortunate event where they may need to monetize it, and it's easier monetizable if it is a completed unit than if it is under construction.
Yeah, I would like.
Yes.
Faye, I would like to just use this opportunity to ask a question which has been crossing my mind to Anuj. In Delhi, I have come across a lot of buyers who are unlikely to get their homes. There are builders who are unlikely, big builders who are unable to deliver, and they have been paying the EMI. Simply, there are a lot of nice people who don't want to destroy their credit worthiness or the CIBIL grade or whatever. So there are new builders who are coming up that, okay, give us your paper, give us your entitlement, and take this ready property. How does this work?
So Dhirendra,
how do they benefit? Where is the catch?
So the catch is the property.
And I come across big hoardings in the city, and I have come across some buyers asking me this question for which I don't have an answer.
Dhirendra, the product that they are buying from the developer is escalated price.
Okay.
And that is where the catch is. So really, if they were not to exchange their incomplete stuck project inventory with a completed unit, they'll be able to buy that completed unit at a discount.
Okay.
So all that is happening is that the loading of the project that is getting valued, which is the stuck project, is being loaded on the product that they are buying. That's all it is. Otherwise, the math does not work.
So all the waiting is not getting discounted for the original buyer.
No.
Okay. All right. Got it.
And how does that work on the back end, Anuj? Are these two builders in a deal?
No, not at all, Faye. They're not in the deal at all. So this is an independent thing that the builder who's giving his product is buying from the home buyer, and in lieu of that, giving a home, but the home or the house is at an escalated price, which is taking into account the price that he would have given it to that prospective home buyer. So basically, I mean, it's a zero-sum game for the home buyer. And then the developer who's inherited that project is going to hope is that at some stage, the project will find its resolution and they'll be able to make some more benefit or more gain out of that.
And Anuj, this is happening also where the lenders to the project are taking charge because they don't have any more faith in the builder's ability to complete the project.
Yeah, Shailesh bhai, what Dhirendra is asking is where there is an exchange offer by the developer.
Yeah, I got his question. But I was just pointing out that there are a lot of A lot of people who are stuck with incomplete projects which they have lent to, and then they want to take charge of it and make sure it gets completed with the additional top-up funding.
And also, Shailesh, there is Swami Fund, which you may recall in 2019, the government had brought in this sovereign fund to
Correct.
give money to the developers as long
For
as
the
to complete the projects.
For completion.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
It's the same question to Dhirendra Kumar at this point. Those people who've lost jobs this year or who have had severe pay cuts and aren't able to make EMIs, aren't able to pay their SIPs, aren't able to pay their insurance policies at this point, what should they do?
Go and find a job, because nothing happens till you start earning.
Go and find work.
Go and find work. Okay. But we have to also acknowledge at this point that it's a very difficult market to find work in because...
You can't create money when you are not working, because, recycling money or moving your money from one place to another is not going to help. Maybe some, investment is all about converting a small cash flow into a capital. And at some stage that capital start producing, you start deriving some, income from that accumulated capital. So if you are in your early stages of your career and you don't have a job, the whole process doesn't start.
And if one was faced with the question, Dhirendra, of liquidating some of their investments in order to make expenses, in order to be able to run their houses at this point, which of those would you recommend they do first?
Yeah, there is, one can prioritize it, and that depends. If you're likely to get a job in 1 or 2 years, then actually get rid of your, gradually, reduce your income requirement as much as possible. Reduce, and start redeeming your fixed income investments, because equity still has a chance, and, has a chance, and you have the time on your side and there is a possibility that you'll be able to restore your income by finding a job, getting work. So that should be the priority. I don't think one should, give up on the possible upside by taking a bet, having a higher allocation when you're young, even though you may not have the income. With equity, it's still a better, you stand a chance of supplementing a larger accumulation over time.
Right. So here's the advice. Basically, write down everything you're spending right now. Cut off anything that you can do without. The discretionary spending has to go first. Stuff you can cut down on, which is the way you travel, the amount of electricity you use, things like that has to be next. Then, of course, there are non-negotiables that we simply can't negotiate. EMI, rent, school fees, that sort of thing, that you just have to pay. The first thing to go, if anything at all, should be the fixed deposits because they're unlikely to appreciate sharply more or surprise you. The mutual funds, the equity investments, you should hold for as long as you can. Real estate, of course, in any of our households goes last. The uncomfortable question, Dhirendra, jewelry should go first?
Yeah, absolutely. But it's a biggest, it's a devastating emotionally. But ideally, it should be. Ideally, it should be.
Yeah, so jewelry goes first before the fixed deposits, if you ask me. But then again, I'm not sentimental, so that's really a collective decision that should be made by the family. Shailesh, Haribhakti, the reverse of that right now, which is that if you're young, if you're ambitious, then put a lot of money into mutual funds for the long term for your retirement. Now is a good time to do it. Have a little bit of money in your fixed deposits, and stay invested. Is that the advice?
No.
No.
The one asset class that you did not mention is the most important one for the young people. Invest in yourself. Become an entrepreneur. Make sure that you invest either in making yourself better, more diversified, deeper, wider, or learn to start a new business. I think we need to get this new asset class completely well recognized. And Faye, that is one of your KRAs. You must get to people and tell them, invest in yourself, become an entrepreneur, take the risk, learn it. Be clear that nobody is in the business of creating a 9-to-5 job for anybody else. In fact, it's the reverse direction. Everybody is trying to cut down on fixed employment.
Yes.
So
Yes,
we just need to all get there.
That is in fact true, and I think that everyone on this panel has made that plunge, and it's an interesting
Yeah, and the joy of doing it all yourself, that is the bonus.
Very true, very true.
Being excited about getting to work every day is a great bonus of this move.
Absolutely.
That's actually true. I can actually vouch for that it's terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. It's the scariest thing that I've ever done. But every little victory is your own, and every decision is your own. And the learning curve it's always make you giddy because of the amount of things you have to learn every single day in order to just stay afloat. But gentlemen, thank you so much. It has been such a pleasure and an honor to have this conversation with you. And I do hope we can continue to have these conversations. Like we're always reminded, the government makes decisions through the year and not just on budget days. Similarly, when we're talking about our money, is something we need to focus on all year round, not only in March when your taxes are due, or not only when there is a budget announcement, but all year round you have to pay attention to it. Mr. Haribhakti, Mr. Puri, and Mr. Kumar, thank you so much. Our audience, don't go anywhere. We have economists joining us right now, and we're going to roll this conversation forward. We'll talk about healthcare. We'll talk about education. We'll talk about all of the questions that you're asking right now in terms of where India is headed, and what the IMF's projections of that 11% will actually mean. So stay with us. I understand Mr. Mohan Guruswamy is already with us, and so is Poonamji. She's an interesting voice right now to examine all of the announcements made in healthcare, because she works in public health and she's done so for many decades. Mr. Haribhakti, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thank you.
All right, staying with the conversation, if I may, let me just ask my producer if it's okay if we just stay with this conversation, because my audience is already here. Let me welcome right now Mr. Mohan Guruswamy, who's in the waiting room, and Poonamji, who joins us as well. And we'll take a look at the announcements that have been made from the point of view of our economy, and we'll take a look at what those challenges are. Just running through some of those points for you guys. Big announcements were made for highways in Kerala, West Bengal, Assam, and Tamil Nadu. But we must remember, all of those states are going into elections. So, one starts to wonder what's going to happen to the rest of us. A massive allocation made to healthcare. But again, these allocations were made over many years. So this is this much for healthcare over the next 5 years, for highways over the next 5 years. We don't really know what is happening this year. And that's a bit of a gray area. 2 public sector banks, 1 general insurance company will be open for stake sale. LIC will be listed this fiscal. Some announcements in the power sector. Consumers will be given a choice of more than 1 distribution company for electricity. There were some announcements in education as well. Income tax we've already gone through. Focus on pollution and sustainable development, as has been pointed out by Mr. Haribhakti in the previous conversation, and a focus on the Ujjwala scheme. So as we bring in my panelists for 9 o'clock, we have Mr. Mohan Guruswamy, who is an economist I respect greatly. He also served as advisor to the finance minister a few years ago. We have Professor Arun Kumar, who joins us as well, who's an economist who's just written a brilliant book about how we should be managing, the difficult economy that we're in. And Pura Mutrija, who is been working in the healthcare sector for so long. Thank you so much for joining us. It is a pleasure to have this conversation with you. If I may start with Professor Kumar, do you see this as the solution? Here's the thing and here's my honest question. This is a difficult year. The things that have happened in the last 1 year, perhaps we haven't seen in our lifetime. It was expected that this would be a budget announcement of some imagination in order to tackle these challenges. Did you see that imagination? Or because I was left looking for it a little bit.
So you're absolutely right. We expected a lot from this budget because never before has the economy shrunk by as much. And the government's figures of 7.7% are not credible because you see the unorganized sector is not included in the data, and therefore the shrinkage is much more than 7.7%. And that's why, the government's figures are likely to turn out to be incorrect. But that's usually the case with most finance ministers, that the figures turn out to be wrong. But what's the real problem? The real problem is we need to revive the economy. Now, to revive the economy, we have to look at what the problem was, and the problem was lack of demand. So demand was short because there was a lot of massive unemployment in the economy. And even now, as the data from Azim Premji shows, that of the people who lost employment, in the beginning, 20% have still not been able to get employment. Second is the major components of the services sector are still not back to where they were in 2019. So, for instance, travel, tourism, hotels, restaurants, etc., are still down. So I suspect that the economy is still down by 10%. But the government keeps saying that in Q3 and Q4, the economy has almost come back to 2019. So if you go by that, then of course your figures will turn out to be wrong. So the macro is the problem, that the budget was expected to raise demand, and the increased expenditure is only from 34.5 lakh crores to 34.8 lakh crore. So there is hardly any increase in expenditure out of the budget. The fiscal deficit is being cut from 9.5% to 6.8%. These two are things that could have led to a greater, expenditure on the poor people. But what's happening? Your expenditure on the poor is falling. For instance, the Rural Employment Guarantee Scheme has been cut. The major, other components of support to the poor, like the PM Kisan, has been curtailed. That has been cut. Even though the finance minister has an explanation for that. So, the major expenditures where you could give purchasing power to the poor people and expect demand to go up, that's not happening. Now, therefore, I am a bit disappointed with the budget, because it could have, led to a sudden sharp rise in the, expenditures. Of course, the fiscal deficit would have risen. But so what? At this point, we are worried more about, what's the purchasing power with the people. We need to increase that if we are to get to the growth. If we are not going to get to growth, then the long term that the government is planning will also not turn out to be right. So these are all supply side. The budget is a very supply side budget rather a demand side budget, and that's the unfortunate part.
Okay, let me also bring in Mr. Mohan Guruswamy. Mr. Guruswamy, here was the announcements that were made by the government didn't give us a clear time frame. Most of them said over the next 5 years. This was to do with health, it had to do with education, it had to do with infrastructure. These were 5-year announcements, and there wasn't any breakup as to how much of that pertained to this year and in what time frame that will we see it be used up. And my sort of problem with budget announcements over many years of being a journalist has been precisely this. We always know what has been announced, but we never know how well it has been utilized and if those targets have been met. And we really have to sift through papers and papers and papers to find out what's really going on. Again, do you agree with Professor Kumar that there was a lack of imagination here? Do you think that it was a lot of numbers being shuffled about? What was your understanding of what was going on?
No, I don't agree with Arun that there's lack of imagination. There's a lot of imagination. Everything is imagined. Like you said, everything, like Modi says, that we will be a $5 trillion economy. Of course, we'll be a $5 trillion economy. But when? We will spend 65,000 crores on the highway in Tamil Nadu. But when? How long will it take? And Bihar is still waiting for that 120,000 infrastructure build-up which was promised last year. So, these promises continue. They are free and footloose with figures. You can come up with any figures. So, I credit them with a lot of imagination. But I have a basic question about these figures. If the economy tanked by 23.1% in the first half, and now you're saying that it has only come down, is only going down by 7%, have you recovered that much? So I have doubts about these figures.
But
where is the growth coming? Your revenues are down.
Yes.
Everything is down. But they're coming up with amazing figures, because Sensex is buoyant. They all feel that, everything is hunky-dory. But Sensex is doing well because there are foreign funds coming in and going out. Because the foreign institutions are flush with money. They still don't address the main issue of this country, which is that 200 million people are daily wagers. who need jobs, who need to be provided for. And you spend 1 lakh crores more on infrastructure. You budget for that. But whether you're going to spend it or not, we don't know. And how can the deficit come down? If you're going to spend, unless you are not spending money or don't plan to spend money, and if you're going to spend money, your deficit will go up. And what is wrong in deficit going up?
No, but Mr. Guruswamy, we had the IMF that expected India to grow at 11.2%. We have the government telling us that collections of GST over the last 4 months have been above 1 lakh crore rupees per month with a incremental increase every month. So is that?
Faye, I tell you this. I've sat there when we send figures to the IMF. IMF takes our figures. IMF doesn't have a different information gathering system. They take whatever we tell them that this is what's going to happen. And this is what we intend to do. And they do a little bit of checking here and there and they go with it. So IMF has no independent source. IMF is good feeling to the merchant bankers and to international bankers that India is going to grow at this rate. But it's not going to happen because they're using our data. So if you expect the economy to grow even at 7% this year, and you're going back to pre-2019 levels. So you really lost 2 years of growth. So you have no plan to revive that. And unless you provide jobs, unless you do purposeful spending, and your entire budget this year has gone up by 1 lakh crores. So where are you going to get all this growth from? If you're going to get growth, your capital expenditure should go up, even your revenue expenditure should go up. Even that's not going up. We were 33.43 lakh crores last year, and this year we're going to be 34.52 lakh crores. Something like 1 lakh crores is the additional amount. And you're going to generate 11%, 12% growth with the budget remaining static. So, Nirmala ji reads out a good speech. And that's very good. My wife was sitting with me when we were watching the budget, and she said she speaks very well. She speaks very well, yes. I said something else. Then I said, if you wanted somebody who speaks well, we could get an announcer from television.
I am not going to comment on that. Take it straight to Professor Mehrotra. Professor Mehrotra, do you agree that there was actually not much in this budget to take home, but there was also perhaps some questions to be raised on the amount of money at all? Is that how you feel as well?
I think Mohan put it very well. The government has used a lot of imagination to conduct a huge amount of jugglery. We are all overawed by the health expenditure increase.
Yes.
So let me try and break down this health expenditure, so-called. So, because I've just come out of a debate on Times Now with none other than Jayant Sinha, and also with Sanjeev Sanyal. You can imagine what they said. So when I questioned the health expenditure jugglery, I was told, so let me first explain what the nature of the jugglery is. So TV headlines are saying 1.37 lakh crore increase in health expenditure. So where is this number?
Anuj, you can switch off your video.
Professor, your internet is a little bad. We're going to come back to you.
What petition in it, which has just been launched.
Okay, Professor Mehrotra, we lost you for a second. If you could just start from the beginning again. Yes, we can hear you now.
Okay. Okay. So what I'm saying is,
Yes.
a lot of jugglery has gone on. Mohan is absolutely right. A lot of imagination goes into the jugglery. And I want to sort of demonstrate this in respect of water and sanitation. Then I'll do it with banking. Water and sanitation, sorry, not water and sanitation, health.
Health, yes.
Yes, 1.37 lakh crores apparently increased. That's what the headline number is. Increase 1.37 lakh crores. Now, the amusing thing is that they've included water and sanitation as part of it, which doesn't belong there. Nowhere else in the world do you include water and sanitation. This is one piece of jugglery. Second piece of jugglery is there is a one-time finance commission allocation to the states, which has been projected as the central government increasing expenditure of 13,000 crores odd. A third is a one-time allocation for vaccines.
Yes.
Okay?
Yes.
That's got nothing to do with strengthening the public health system. What we were hoping for as an increase of expenditure on the public health system, because we spend only 1.3% of GDP in this last fiscal year. We need to spend at least 2.5% of GDP well before 2025, unlike what the national health policy is saying. And then there was this announcement of a 64,000.
Okay, we're losing our connection again, Professor Malhotra. We'll come back to you. Let me just bring in Kumar Muthreja, who is obviously not
new
in
scheme.
All right, we'll come back to Professor Malhotra. Poonam Muthreja still has daylight. I'm assuming she's not in the country. She's the Executive Director of the Population Foundation of India and has worked in the area of public health for a very long time. Poonamji, the question of the big healthcare announcement, which Professor Malhotra is right, is a lot of money. According to newspapers, according to calculation, it's an increase of 1.37% from last year. Last year's allocation was 94,452 crore rupees. It is now 2,23,846 crore rupees. But do you see it going into the wrong spaces? Is it not focusing on the things that it needs to focus on? Or is this a good thing that we should be celebrating?
Yeah, so, the devil lies in the detail whenever we look at a budget. So if you look at the details here, first of all, as you also said in the beginning, this allocation, the increase is over a period of 5 years. And if we look at inflation rates, even right now, the NHM, National Health Mission budget, which is the Health Ministry's budget, which is a 9% increase, close to 9% increase, is going to be 9.6% over the budget allocations of the previous financial year. It is going to be offset by the inflation. So that is one. Number two, there are these one-time, which very rightly Santosh pointed out, there are these one-time expenditures or allocations, whether it is for vaccines or it is for the central government. What I don't understand is their prioritizing. For instance, COVID, if COVID didn't need this government to think about investing in infrastructure for health, then what will? And so rightly, they have positioned health as one of the 6 pillars of the budget, as the finance minister said. But it is a political statement, which I welcome, that politicians are realizing, unfortunately, through a huge pandemic and tragedy, that health is important. But if you look at the details, there is going to be investment in the private public partnership without any changes in private sector. It's an unregulated sector. We are going to give subsidized land for new hospitals, linking up district hospitals with district hospitals with private sector hospitals. In, you know, the finance minister said in the 147 aspirational districts that Niti Aayog has, but those are districts that don't have any private sector. Where does the private sector go to the most remote areas? It doesn't exist. And even if it existed, the minute COVID happened, they all disappeared. So given our most recent experience, I am surprised that there is the infrastructure investment. A big chunk is planned for this area, and without any understanding, you know, it's like the finance minister trying to do health policy. Okay, and then she says, or they say that health, urban health, which is totally neglected, is going to get a big fillip, and they're going to have large number of health facilities in the urban health. Do you know what is the budget increase over the last meager year budget? 50 crores is all they have budgeted after making so many statements and noise. So, you know, while first I was also very excited at this 137% increase, and I even made a press statement. And then when I started looking for the details of the budget, I was crying. I want to cry, because this is politics with health at a time when we can't afford to do any politics. Second, I'd like to say, you know, just when we had a great NFHS survey showing how fertility is declining, at the same time, we've seen this government very worried about increases in numbers and doing coercive population policies and so many statements. They have decreased the budget. The allocation for the central sector, centrally sponsored family planning scheme includes the budget for procurement and distribution of contraceptives in states. It's been reduced by 35% from 600 crores to 387 crores. I just don't understand why we are doing this. What is the logic when there is a concern? I mean, the vaccine investment clearly comes not just as a health concern, but that's the only thing that will help the economy in a big way, given the COVID fear and situation. So why are we, then are we not disinvesting in family planning when we know that an increase in pressure of growth and migration on Indian cities, as well as investing in family planning, is going to could increase the GDP additionally, as per a study that we did, the cost of inaction in family planning in India. It'll increase and rise additional 13% the GDP by 2030 if family planning policies and investments were actively prioritized. And finally, I do want to say, what happened to allocations for the PM Jan Arogya Yojana, which was announced with great fanfare under Ayushman Bharat? There is a stagnance of 6,400 crores for 2021. What happens to insurance? So the Atmanirbhar is the new word to be used. They could have added. So either they say it's a failed scheme, which I believe it is, but giving it a new name is again politics. So I'm sorry, but I am disappointed with the details, and these numbers make me feel good still. And finally, I'd like to say that I do feel that this integrated approach, while Santosh said they have brought in sanitation into the budget of health, they've also brought in, I like the integrated approach, however, Santosh, where you have health, nutrition, you have promoting, you have air pollution and sanitation, water and sanitation. All, at least there's a vision somewhere, and I like the coordination, but we need the money for it, and you have got them there.
So this is interesting, because Poonam Mathreja is reading it as coordination between water, sanitation and health. But I believe Professor Mehrotra read it as jugglery, where water and sanitation are being included to make the health allocation seem bigger than it truly is.
I agree with him.
Okay. I don't
But
think
I
we
just
have
want to say
to-
one last point, Faye, very quickly.
Yes.
Gender disparities and investing in young people came out in the last 1 year as a priority the government needs to focus on, and the gender, the way women have got impacted, even just if you look at health, 2 million additional babies, you and I discussed in the last program, women not having access to abortion, institutional births, etc. What happened? Why have we not made some additional stress and investment in women's health? And young people and their mental health came to the fore as a key issue. I don't, so I want to put that on the agenda today.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And I'll come back to that. And also, when we do have Professor Mehrotra, we'll have him finish his argument that he had put forward. Going back to Professor Mehrotra, can you hear us?
I think we've discussed health enough, because there isn't much in the budget on health. I think we've done enough justice to them. Let's think about the other things that they claim to be great successes. So, for instance, let's look at banking. So they've, a lot of people are favor this creation of an asset restructuring company, which is, in other words, a bad bank, which is going to wipe clean the bad assets of the public sector banks. Fine.
Yeah.
But how are you going to change the behavior of the current public sector banks? Are you going to improve the governance of the public sector banks? One might be in favor of a bad bank in a situation where the government is seriously changing the governance structures within the public sector banks. And simply divesting PSBs, public sector banks, is not going to be enough. Divesting two of them, good thing, but that's not going to change the rest of them. So the problem still remains. If the existing banks are going to see their NPAs rise from 8.5% in 2020 to 14.5% at a minimum, as the RBI has predicted, by September of 2021, then what are you going to do? I mean, there is not a hope in hell that these banks will be able to lend if you don't change their governance, and if you don't, in fact, partially hive them off to the private sector, because that should be the way to recapitalize them, not put your and my taxpayer money. 20,000 crores has gone into these banks whose governance is not changed. How do we know that they are not going to still be engaged in phone banking? I want to tell you some numbers. The frauds in our banking system, as revealed by the RBI last year, were of the order of 77,000 crores. This year, they are said to be 1.85 lakh crores, purely frauds. I'm not talking about restructured loans which have been, written off or restructured. And frauds usually get discovered within 2 or 3 years, which means that most of these frauds and these increasing frauds have happened in the last few years. So don't blame the previous government. The previous government did phone banking, messed things up, no question about it. But the fact of the matter is, the bank frauds show in no uncertain terms that if you don't change the governance and you still pump in money and you wipe their assets, their bad assets clean by creating a bad bank, then we are heading to a disaster. This is a catastrophic development in the absence of governance reforms. So I hope for goodness that we get back, governance reforms. I don't want to go on. I could talk about this great enthusiasm about the stock market.
Yes.
Because that's happening only because, as Mohan rightly said, liquidity coming in, and middle class and above have been saving up because they're not going on holidays. They're not going to us. They're not eating out. So their savings have increased. So in addition to the foreign liquidity, we now have 1 million new
Retail investors.
individual investors investing in the stock market. So 10 million new individual investors are buying up the market domestically as well in the last 10 months. This is what is driving the stock market up. And the reason why the markets are happy is because the government has not rocked the boat. No taxes on the rich, etc. There's been no rocking of the boat. Everything is hunky-dory. And everyone, in the upper classes will be laughing their way to the bank. And they keep talking still about V-shaped recovery. They never use the word K-shaped recovery when we know perfectly well that this is going to be a K-shaped recovery, the meaning of which is that, as the World Bank has estimated, there'll be an increase of 85 million of new poor in the year 2020, and more to come in 2021. So what are we talking about here?
Anyone who wants to respond to that, Professor Kumar? If we, it breaks my heart that that anyone on this panel had to say, "Listen, we've talked about health enough," because I can't think of anything, and I can't think of anything we should be talking about more in this year, especially since we had all sort of hung our hopes on this budget, saying that here is an opportunity for health to get the attention that it really deserves, but we haven't been giving it for the last forgive me. I see Mr. Guruswami's hand go up. Go ahead.
We go back to health. Now, you're all assuming that this coronavirus will continue as it is. You got to mutate. The South African mutant, the existing vaccines are 50% effective on it. And the virus is mutating fast. So if you use the vaccines we are using now, then it'll take a year before you come up with an antidote to this new mutant. To deal with this is to go for the new technology, the mRNA technology, where you can program a new spike molecule. But for that, you have to make the huge investments. You got to let Pfizer come and kill us. Now, how are you going? You see, the road map is there. I always say that you never follow the road map because there are always floods on the way. Bridges collapse. So we have no alternatives here. We are all hoping that everything, and flights have been allowed from as if nothing's happened. You'll have one big gathering and super spreader event, and that is it. We'll be back to square one. Second thing is this, some things which are interesting about the budget is that Finance Minister used the word privatization for the first time. The word always was disinvestment. Now, privatization is very interesting, which means that management of these companies, possibly these banks, could be privatized, become independent. So like Santosh says, you got to restructure these banks and take them out of the Ministry of Finance. What we are operating right now is a industrial licensing policy through the financial institutions. Because the financial institutions decide who's going to expand capacity, who's going to get capacity by allocating funds. Now, the second thing is that she has earmarked 3,700 crores for the new census, to digitize the census. That's very interesting. We might get data fast. I think that's the only thing which really caught my fancy, apart from the pre-filled IT forms. Okay, it's very good, I think that's very imaginative, to use a phrase, Arun's word. That is imaginative. That's pretty good. I think these are the small things which are quite nice there. But on the big macro picture, I completely agree with Santosh. Completely missed it. And the rest is all lies.
Professor Kumar?
What I'd say is that a budget is first about your expenditures and revenues, and then about policies. What we are doing is that we are using part of the budget speech to talk about what policies will be followed, and then what are the expenditure allocations for achieving those. That is where the problem lies. Because if you announce a lot of things, as everybody's saying, but don't allocate funds or are not able to implement the policies, then it falls flat. So what I'm finding difficult with this budget is that, like say, for instance, the fiscal deficit is supposed to have risen to 9.5%. But why has that happened? Because, you've transferred funds from the Food Corporation of India, which you had earlier taken out of the budget, now back to the budget, so about 2.5 lakh crore is coming from there, So therefore, the fiscal deficit is simply a transfer from one end to the other. So it doesn't lead to an increase in the demand in the economy because it's just transferred from one hand to the other hand of the government, So in a sense, the point that I was trying to make earlier also was that it was expected that the budget would give boost to the growth of the economy. Now, of course, because of the low base in the Q1 of this year, the next year Q1 would be very high. If it was minus 23.9%, then in the Q1 of the coming year, you will of course have about 20% rate of growth. So therefore, achieving 11% rate of growth is not a problem, but you will not be back to 2019 economy. The level of, so we have to distinguish between the rate of the level of the economy. The level of the economy will remain below 2019, and it's unlikely to come back. And then, as the point that Mohan has made, the uncertainty of the virus, whether you'll be able to vaccinate 1.38 crore, 1.38 billion people within a year and a half, whether you'll have the, new spikes coming in, the new mutations coming in, etc. So there'll be a lot of uncertainty. So my point is that, the budget is more a supply side. That means in the long run, what will happen? But the short run, which is the important thing today, because if the short run is not right, the long run will also not be achieved. So in the short run, you needed to generate demand, and especially from the poor. If you give only to the well-off sections, they are not going to spend. If you give to the poor, they'll spend the entire amount of money that they get. So therefore you had to increase the rural employment guarantee scheme, where already the data says that people are getting only 45 days of work rather than 100 days of work. And because of the destitution and because people are not getting work in the urban areas, you perhaps needed to expand it to 200 days. Similarly, in the urban areas, you needed to have an employment guarantee scheme like the rural employment guarantee scheme to give work to the educated unemployed in the urban areas, which has also not been done. So these are the things on which expenditure should have been increased. But instead, what has been done is all the social sectors, they're suffering, whether it be the PM Kisan, whether it be the rural employment guarantee scheme, and whether it be the other such schemes. That I've counted at least 7-8 such schemes which would have given funds to the poor people. Those have all been reduced. So the problem is that you're not going to be able to generate enough demand to boost the growth back so that your economy recovers quicker. And that is what needed to be done. So in the long run, whether you'll achieve everything in 5 years or 10 years, that's a different point. But whether we are on the path to that recovery, that is the main question that we need to ask from the budget.
A couple of questions coming in. There's one question from Gagan that says, what's in this for higher education? Let me just take you through what has been announced. The Union Budget 2021 made an allocation of 93,224 crore rupees towards the Education Ministry in the budget estimate. It's a total allocation, we understand, is a 9.5% increase from last year. But is it going in the right places? Will it actually help the education sector? Is there enough of it going into primary and rural education? Poonamji, have you had a chance to look at it?
No, I haven't looked at the detail, but I know that the education, the decrease in the allocation for education comes as a surprise, as the education sector has suffered severe distress during the pandemic. We are particularly worried about the high dropout rates among students, especially the girls. And so I'm looking at the overall decrease. I did not go into the detail, I'm afraid, on the education budget, but then I would have expected much higher allocations given the new education policy, which was brought in last year during the COVID period, which talks about higher investments in higher education and opening up so many new institutions apart from strengthening the education system. But I also want to take this opportunity to say that, while they've decreased education budget, they have also decreased the allocations for the midday meal scheme and the Anganwadi program. The ICDS program has been clubbed with schemes under Saksham, Yet the Saksham budget in 2022 is less than the Anganwadi budget in 2020 and 21, which means that school-going kids, we are reducing at a time when they need more nutrition and there is rural distress. 50% of Indians are in the vulnerable categories. At this point of time, that midday meal and other food security that we have for the young kids in the country through the Anganwadi program, that is going to suffer enormously. Similarly, they've clubbed other schemes under Samarthya, which includes the subsidy given to pregnant women for additional nutrition. So all this is related and is going to have an overall impact.
So Faye, on education, the cut has been, the allocation last year was 99,000 crores, and that was this year in the revised estimate to 85,000 crores. And now it's going to go up to 93,000 crores, which is still going to be 6 crores less than what was the BE for last year. Whereas the issue is that you see a lot of children of the poor people dropped out of private schools and they want to go to the public schools. So I think the allocation had to be sharply increased towards school education and public education. Instead, what you see is that on BE to BE, there's a 6,000 crores cut. Second thing is, a lot of teachers are required in schools, because in government schools, you may have 80 people, 90 children to a class. So you needed to allocate, and that could be one way to provide employment in the rural areas and urban areas by giving more funds to education and to health. Now that opportunity has been also lost. And, if I look at it, what is, in the expenditure of major items under health, only health, that has been brought down from 82,000 crores revised estimate to 74,000 crores. So while, Santosh and Poonam are right that other things have been included, but what was purely for health, what was purely on the health budget, that has been brought down in the revised estimates from 82,000 crores to 74,000 crores. Whereas that should have been increased because the public health, public education have become even more important. And what the pandemic has taught us is that we are a collectivity. We have to deal with the pandemic as a collectivity, rather than as an individual. And collectivity means public, so public goods have to be given, in a much larger amount. For instance, for education, I think free Wi-Fi is very important. I think Wi-Fi should be made a public good, should be made available to everybody, so that even children of the poor people, they can get a Wi-Fi free. They can, use some kind of, a device in some kind of library. Libraries need to be set up where children of the poor people can go and access computers and so on.
Well, what the government is doing actually is a little bit the opposite direction, where they've actually cut off the internet in some parts around our national capital in order to control protests, not realizing that in this pandemic, education is dependent on internet, healthcare is dependent on internet, accessing government services dependent on internet. The whole, it's not just about the protest, but a lot of lives are just going to come to a grinding halt. Mr. Guruswamy, I noticed you wanted to say something. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, Faye, all this spending on education, what purpose is it serving? Now, there's a Pratham report which I just saw that children in class 5 are not able to read books of class 2, not able to do the 4 calculations, addition, multiplication, subtraction, and division. So what kind of education are you giving me? And what is the kind of organization you have for schools? Now, I go to schools in a couple of districts outside Hyderabad, and I visit them because I go to the forest, and there in the forest I see these schools. Generally don't have teachers. They're sitting there. Sometimes the office assistant is doubling in as teacher. People are absent. They don't take classes. Kids come there for the midday meals. Now, this year, they've shut the schools down because of Corona. And the kids have all gone home. Now, they come, so talk about computers, Wi-Fi and all, irrelevant here. This is the condition of 60% of our education system. And this little school is controlled from the state capital, which is 300 kilometers away and about 10 hours drive away. Now, I can't understand why districts can't control their own schools, why districts can't control their own hospitals. and be autonomous and independent? Why should they all report to one head? Why should doctors be moved around by one person? So this is the kind of autonomy we need. The problem in India is not intention, not even money sometimes. It's just how badly we're organized. And first lesson you learn in your teaching management or public administration is the nature of the institution determines the outcome. So if you don't reform public, every prime minister who's come to power since after Indira Gandhi has said that government reforms is my number one priority. And they haven't done anything. The same centralized colonial structure. Unless you attend to this, I thought they will use this pandemic as an excuse to start decentralizing in a rapid way. But they're going towards more centralization. Yeah, sorry. Sorry, I diverted from the issue. From the budget at least. Yeah.
I think this is also related to the lack of resources with the states. If you look at the transfers from the center to the states, there's a problem because the center is trying to raise funds in a way that the state share gets truncated. They don't get 42% of the center's resources, which under the Finance Commission they were supposed to get. They're getting roughly about 32% or roughly 31% because of the way. Now, therefore, the states are facing a double whammy. Firstly, because of the downturn in the economy, their SGST has come down, their other tax revenues have come down, and also what the center should have transferred to them, that has come down because the center's taxes have come down. And they are the ones who do 80% of the expenditure on education and health. So if you are to boost public expenditure on education and health, you need to see that the state's resources are restored. And the states are finding that difficult. So I think when we're discussing education and health, we have to see the state's position. Their resource position is very bad. Their deficit is quite high. And therefore, they will compress these expenditures as the time goes by.
And my last question to you all, which is also coming in from our audience at this point, is, was there anything in this budget that will create jobs? Anirudh Sabu is asking the same question. Capital expenditure has not increased. Really, the challenge here right now is to create jobs so that people have money in their hands, they can run their homes, we're not in distress like we are right now. Professor Mehrotra, was there enough, in your opinion, in this budget, because that's what we've all been looking at for the last several months, to revive the job sector?
In all fairness, one has to admit that infrastructure investment is increased. And that's the one thing that is increased. That's one thing in favor of this budget that one can say. So yes, some jobs will get created. Now, there is a difference between, infrastructure investment and the job creation from that, as opposed to more, housing investment. Or Manrega investment, or so the point I'm making is that the way the infrastructure investment will pan out is that it is relatively capital intensive methods of building roads, of building structures of power plants, what have you, which do not generate that many jobs. They do generate jobs, but not that many. In fact, what's remarkable is that when you have a sort of increasing public investment in infrastructure, which brings in, crowds in private investment as well, what happens is that the large private firms come in. The Gammon India, the Shapurji Palanji, the L&T, they come in, which use capital intensive methods, inevitably. So the organized segment of construction, that sector does increase jobs. But the unorganized, that does not see that many jobs being created. So unfortunately, there's bad news even there. But let me say one or two words about education, because is that because of crore, children are being pulled out of school, and the evidence shows up in the data from ASR that year, what it shows is that primary enrollment, meaning for classes 1 to 5, for 6 to 11-year-olds, has actually fallen.
Yes.
Has actually fallen. In addition to the dropout rate issue.
Right. Okay, so we can't unfortunately understand what Professor Meroth is saying because of his internet, but we'll come back to him. One quick
in
question.
Addition to this,
yes.
His infrastructure is bad.
Infrastructure is bad. There's one question from
Wi-Fi is not good. Wi-Fi needs to be given, But I think carry forward what Santosh was saying is very clear that if you lose employment in the rural employment guarantee scheme and you lose employment in education and health, then you're losing far more jobs than the jobs you're creating in the infrastructure sector, in the organized sector. So, for instance, if you have big highways and big, railway freight corridors, etc., they will not generate that many jobs. So you're losing many more jobs than you're creating jobs. And therefore, in the net, you are having a problem. And that's the point I was trying to make earlier, that if you don't generate jobs in those areas like rural employment guarantee scheme, urban guarantee scheme, etc., then you are going to have in the net a fall in employment. And that's what you don't want. And that's what this budget is not targeting properly. Because incomes have to be given to the people who've lost jobs, who've lost incomes. If you do that, then only will the demand rise in the economy and businesses will do well and the growth rate go up.
A very good question coming in from Abhishek, Mittal and Tanvi. They asked this question, which is the FM announced that the loan provision to the FCI, which is the Food Corporation of India, that provision has been done away with and the budgetary provision has been made elsewhere. What does this mean? And is this in line with the 3 farm bills? Does this change what the government is going to procure? Mr. Goswami?
Most certainly, the government is going to procure less and less each year because the objectives are very clear and they're very specific on that. And that is one reason why you have to reduce money with FCI, because there is an overstock of food grains now. You are holding about 43 million tons in excess to what you're supposed to hold for as a buffer. And how much more can you pile up? And so, I think that is very clear and it's coming there. But the point I'd like to dwell on is, again, infrastructure spending. Like Arun is right. If you build these big highways, they will hardly employ any people. You've got to dovetail it with, say, rural employment on canals, irrigation schemes, minor irrigation schemes. You've got to have a blueprint for that. You keep thinking gigantically, it doesn't employ many people. And the value addition goes to people who already don't need any assistance from the state. The companies will get it, the corporate executives will get it, the corporations will get it. And with little employment, what you need is to get jobs for this 200 million people. The SME sector has to be revived. The small-scale sectors have to be revived. Handloom sector has to be revived. So you have to put money there. You're going to say you're going to put money for construction. What are you going to do? Build buildings and let people come and buy? People won't buy. People need to have money and people need to get more credit from banks to buy. So that you address it very differently. Now, the income tax exemption for interest is still at 1.5 lakhs. You want people to buy houses, you raise the exemption. And then you say only to certain classes of people. Now, why should you put limits of 10 lakhs a house, 10 lakh houses or 20 lakh houses? Let those who can borrow or credit worthy take a tax write-off and invest in housing. Then you create jobs. And you can create 60 to 70 million jobs in the construction sector. Because that is what it used to employ. And now it is down to half. Small retail has to be revived. So people have to get money in their hands. That employs about 55 million people. So this is where this unorganized sector goes. And then there is the small factories, the lathe machine shops and all these fellows that are also dependent on big industry. So you need to work from the bottom. They are thinking already of smart cities and super fast trains, etc., etc. This is not the time for that. The time is to put people to work, earning 300 rupees a day, 350 rupees a day. People will be grateful for that.
Poonamji, go ahead.
Yeah. So, talking about jobs, a reduction of 42% in the fund allocated for Manrega in this budget this year will hurt the incomes of the most vulnerable, especially, and there are plenty of migrants who went back and haven't come back. And this will be a huge setback to the path to recovery, apart from an opportunity which could have been given for job creation. Second,
I apologize, Poonamji, but it seems like your internet is also giving us trouble today. But and we are running out of time, so we're going to wrap this up here. But we'll come back and have more conversations on how this.
If is it better? I just want to make one quick point. I've switched off my video.
It isn't better, but we're going to try and power through it. Go ahead.
No, and the second, I mean, it is not just financial investments and in the infrastructure in health. What is needed in the health most is human resources, and we could have used this opportunity in terms of creating jobs. We could have had a plan or investment in medical colleges, in nursing colleges, investing in these 3.3 million frontline health workers to train them, given that they are the foundation today of India's public health. It is a totally missed opportunity. Instead, ironically, Nirmala Sitharaman talked about the fact that the world needs Indian health functionaries. They need them in their countries, and even though they're not well trained, they're not fully trained.
Okay, I understood. Forgive me for cutting you off, but it is really difficult audio to understand. But effectively, you're saying that this was a good opportunity to focus on training healthcare professionals and thereby introducing more jobs into the market. Given that the fact that Indian healthcare professionals are actually have formed a backbone of healthcare across the world. Our nursing staff, for example, Indian nurses are are around the world right now, and perhaps have done a massive service to the world during this last 1 year. This was a good opportunity to increase more jobs in that sector by increasing training. We're going to leave it there, though. We do hope that we can have this conversation again in the future with stronger internet infrastructure and better audio. I thank all of you for making time for us this evening. There have been several disappointments in the fact that we were looking at this budget over the course of many months to address the job challenges, to address the challenges of education, healthcare, malnourishment among children, and many of the other problems we've discussed. But there doesn't seem to be too many solutions here. It's actually just a statement of accounts, but we'll decode more of it as the fine print becomes more obvious over the next few days. Thank you for watching. Good night.
Thanks.